In the despair-inducing midst of It's So Over, I found within me an unbreakable, indomitable, we're so back. It finally happened. After so many years of what I can only call a interesting development cycle, we finally, almost, have Hytale. I almost don't even believe the words coming out of my own mouth, but sometimes reality is stranger than fiction. And while we don't have a release date yet, we do have our first long compilation of gameplay since ever. Over the years, we have seen small clips or teasers, but this is 16 minutes of straight gameplay. So, what's the verdict? It looks pretty good. Now, you can definitely see the rough edges, but considering the early access pep talk we got from Simon, I was expecting a lot worse. But today, I'm not here to glaze the gameplay. You see, the beauty of these kind of games is every player gets to decide what they want most out of their experience. Are you a farmer, passionately but patiently cultivating your crops until the heat death of the universe? Or maybe you're a builder, torn between the never-ending dilemma of crafting masterpieces of architecture or horrors beyond mortal comprehension. Or maybe you're like me, a primal, unfettered warrior. Listen, there is a pure, transcendental experience of seeing something for the first time and having your raw desire to be to go beat it over the head or die trying. Which is why today, I'm not going to be analyzing all of the features shown in this gameplay. I'm sure you can find someone else to do that. No, today, we're breaking down the combat. So, let's start at the most basic level. To understand the combat system, you first need to understand your character. This is you. Say hi. You fucking idiot. You said hi to yourself. Before we cover your capabilities, let's break down your two resources, health and stamina. I guess mana exists too, but magic is kind of undercooked right now, and we don't really see anything about it in the gameplay anyway, so I'm making the executive decision to ignore it. Health is mostly self-explanatory. Get hit and you take damage. Reach 0 and you die in real life permanently. Interestingly, though this could just be the game being unfinished, but at least in the build Simon was playing, there didn't seem to be natural health regen. Meaning that to regain your precious vitality, you'll need consumables, special equipment, or some other means. Next, and more mechanically important, is your stamina. Stamina is a very straightforward resource. Certain actions will cost it and delay its regeneration, but surprisingly not every combat action does so. We'll cover what does and doesn't use stamina as we go along. Now, for your actual capabilities, the only base movement tool that costs stamina is sprinting. However, this applies even during other actions. For example, mantling lets you climb up small ledges for no cost, but if you hold sprint, you'll lose stamina the entire way up. Rolling, which seems to be activated by landing and crouch, don't quote me on that, lets you avoid fall damage and gives you a burst of momentum. Lastly, there's potentially one more movement option in dashing, but I'm not entirely sure if it's a base mechanic or if it even really exists. Here's an example of it from this old PvP clip, and there are spots in the new gameplay that I very much think look like dashing, but again, I have no idea if this exists or if it's a base mechanic, or if it's locked to certain weapons, but regardless of any of that, if it does exist, it doesn't cost stamina, which is weird and probably unintentional. Now, what does any of this have to do with the game's combat? Because a very important aspect of Hytale's combat is that, unlike, say, an axe in Minecraft, which is a point-and-click weapon, in this game, everything is hitbox-based, which means that how a player is able to move, especially in fights that aren't on flat terrain, is very important. Additionally, considering that moving quickly, aka sprinting, costs stamina, among other things, knowing what costs stamina and what doesn't is also very important. Alright, now we can get to the good stuff, the actual combat. Attacks in this game seem to come in three forms: basics, signatures, and techniques. Basic attacks are exactly what they sound like. Left click and you swing. These can also be held and charged, though I don't know exactly what this does, but I assume it probably increases damage or knockback or something of that nature. Also, different weapons have different attack speeds for their basics. Probably self-explanatory, but hey, you know how it is. Signatures are special attacks that vary between weapons. To use them, you have to charge up a meter by landing hits. And I do mean landing hits, as getting your attack blocked or whiffing gives you nothing. Two important things to note about these. Firstly, they seemingly have no cooldown and are purely limited by how fast you can charge your meter. Secondly, switching weapons completely resets your meter. So, while keeping multiple weapons on you gives you versatility, switching whenever you want means that you might lose your signature. Lastly are techniques, or at least that's what I'm going to call them for the time being. They also seem to vary by weapon, but unlike signature attacks, they rely on certain input methods to execute and cost stamina. For example, charging an attack and jumping seems to be a pretty universal activation method for multiple weapons. Another example would be block attacks, which as you might imagine are quick strikes that come out of block. Which leads me to blocking. Blocking's a mechanic that I'm actually kind of unsure about. Though you can block with some weapons even without a shield, unless I'm blind, deaf, or otherwise an idiot, the only successful blocks I saw in the 16 minutes were using a shield. All the rest of them were whiffed blocks. Again, I probably just missed an example, gonna be honest with you, but that means that I can't directly compare what the difference is between shield and non-shield, but here are the basics of blocking. Blocking seems to negate all or at least most damage. This could just be temporary, since way back in the day we did see blocking only negate a little bit of the damage, but who knows. It also pauses stamina regeneration but doesn't cost any stamina in and of itself. And while this is just a hunch based on how we see it used in the gameplay, it seems to also stop you from sprinting, but I don't think it slows you down, or if it does, it's not any slower than basic walking. Block attacks, as mentioned above, are a technique you can employ at the cost of stamina, and they seem to come out very quickly, making them very good at punishing people for mashing at a block or whiffing hits. For the sake of sanity, I'm going to assume that there might be ways to bypass blocks such as guard breaks, back attacks, or chip damage, but this is all my own hopeful speculation. The final mechanic I need to discuss is ranged weapons. Ranged weapons, not counting magic, seem to come in two forms, shooting and throwing. While we don't see any examples of throwing weapons being used in this compilation, we know they exist in the form of spears and throwing knives, which actually means in this version of the combat system, they should be pretty versatile weapons if they come with their own techniques and signatures. As far as shooting weapons go, we technically see 3, but the player only uses 2. Not counting the Glock and Simon's Rari. First is the ever-humble bow. It functions largely like the Minecraft bow, having to charge up and loose individual arrows with varying power and range based on the charge. Its signature is a triple shot that apparently charges much faster than intended. Next up is the repeating crossbow. On one hand, you get to shoot instantly and rapidly. On the other hand, it takes a solid 10 years to reload, so make of that what you will. Currently, it has no signature, but I have absolutely no idea if this is intentional or if it's unfinished. And as far as I could see, neither of these weapons have any techniques, though it is of note that the clip, which I think is showing a dash being used, is only done with the crossbow out, so make of that what you will. Finally, there's one more, in the form of a gun. Unfortunately, Simon decided to beat the brakes off of it before we could see it do anything, so for now, I'll just assume it functions somewhat similarly to the repeating crossbow. And there you have the core mechanics of Hytale's combat. Well, from what I can gather anyway. I know I skipped over things like offhands or armor or even totems, but genuinely I don't think I have enough to really speculate on all of those, so we'll leave those whenever they're better explained. But from what we can speculate on, how does all of this shape up? Ironically, the clips that we already have paint the picture pretty well. In both cases of PvE or PvP, spacing, timing, and resource management are going to be your main factors in play in basically every fight. Seems like most weapons have some kind of technique to gap close, but these options are very stamina intensive. And if you burn all your stamina, you can't sprint, and if you can't sprint, you probably can't get to the person you're trying to murder, and in that case, you might be catching 20 rounds. But at the same time, one thing you might have noticed I didn't mention in this entire video is hit stun. Though Hytale's big brother is an obvious exception, lots of games with in-depth combat systems usually feature some kind of hit stun to punish you for mistakes and stop fights from devolving into all-out brawls or DPS checks. However, Hytale seemingly has no such thing. This means that defensive play has a much harder time warding off pressure, since you can't rely on one well-spaced hit to shut down your opponent while you make distance. But paradoxically, this means that running at your opponent spamming M1 probably isn't the winning solution either, and here's why. Earlier I mentioned one big difference between this game and Minecraft is the fact that the weapons here are going to be hitbox based. This means that unless you are literally right on top of someone or have some way of stunning or slowing them, it's very hard to guarantee that your weapon will hit. In Minecraft, if someone is in range and your cursor's on them, your hit will connect. But in Hytale, there's a lot of things that can affect this, like due to how both of you are moving, due to the fact that most weapons can block, or even due to things like knockback inflicted by certain weapons. Even if your attack is well aimed, and even if you're in range at the time, you could still just miss. And this is why, ultimately, combat is going to come down to a delicate balance of spacing, timing, and managing resources. Who understands the range matchup better? Who can weave in hits while avoiding as many as possible? And who can most effectively make use of both their stamina and signatures is probably going to end up winning. And while there will always be players who stick to certain playstyles, my point is I don't think there will be a one-size-fits-all solution to the game's combat. Which is a good thing. Or maybe there will, because game balance is also very interesting. TLDR, the combat looks like it's going to be very fun, very fast, and probably a little technical. And this is why I wanted to talk about it. Now, I have to be honest, I am a little bit more curious to see what they're cooking with magic, because I am a wizard at heart, but I can wait. And that's about it. That's all I got. Thank you for watching.